Hello and welcome. My name is Jevgenij Rusakov and you're watching TVP World, interview from Vilnius. Europeans remain skeptical about national governments' efforts to address corruption. In terms of numbers, 68% of citizens consider corruption to be widespread in their member states. To discuss the problems of corruption and ways of fighting it, we are joined today by the founder of the transparencyschool.org and a board member of the European Compliance Professionals Association, Sergejus Muravjovas. Hello, Sergejus, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
First question. Most Europeans consider corruption to be unacceptable, but the majority of Europeans still consider corruption to be widespread in their country. So how come? How come these two work together?
Well, it's simple. Basically, it means that we still have a problem, and an important problem on our hands, which translates in some cases to people experiencing corruption on the ground. When we speak about bribery in predominantly new EU member states, those that have not sorted out the problems of bribery, for instance, in the healthcare sector or the police, and political corruption, which often is based on perception. Yet what people want is a greater opportunity to participate in decision-making, to have a better understanding how decisions are made, and would like to see their politicians lead by example and act in a more transparent way.
Okay, then there's a question. Do people have that chance to play a bigger role?
Increasingly so. And I've worked on the issues of transparency and anti-corruption for many years, so it would be very easy to be skeptical because the numbers you bring up clearly show there's an issue. But I'm very happy to see that more and more governments all around the EU, not only national governments, but municipal governments, understand that they need to engage citizens, and they experiment with, say, participatory budgeting. So they allow people to decide on a certain number of funds jointly, collectively, be it Paris, be it Madrid, be it Vilnius. And also we see that citizen assemblies are picking up, and people increasingly are invited and are being considered as those who can help make best decisions. For instance, if you plan an airport parking, should you ask the drivers? Should you ask the travelers what is comfortable, what is not, so that it's more human-centric design-wise, but also people understand how decisions are made?
Okay, but again, we're coming back to corruption. In your opinion, is corruption a big problem for the EU?
It is a big challenge, I would phrase it differently, simply because now we all understand that we need to ensure more transparent decision-making, greater integrity of public officials, because corruption can also be used in strategic ways by our enemies and people who do not like to see EU countries succeed. This is something which is front and center on a lot of governments' agendas. I was in Brussels for the second plenary of the Anti-Corruption Network. It's clear to me that it's not just law enforcement agencies anymore. It's also monitoring institutions that deal with conflicts of interest, whistleblowing protection, ethics in the public sector that join forces and understand that it's not just about guidelines on paper. You really need to seek this behavioral change. You need to be very smart about how you instill certain social norms. And this is a great revelation, because it would have been very easy to be stuck in this catch-22 situation and just show paper-based reports. People realize this is not enough, and I think we are on the right track.
You've mentioned this behavioral change. Where does it have to start from?
That's a very important question. And I think it has to start simultaneously both at the top and at the bottom. And you have to meet in the middle. And what I mean by that is that politicians do need to lead by example. The leaders in the public sector, the heads of institutions, need to show that they really buy in, not because they are obliged to do so by laws in their respective countries, but because this is what the new generation of employees, EU citizens, want. People feel more entitled. They know that if they pay taxes and they are citizens of their respective countries, they want to get answers to the questions that they're literate to ask. And of course, then you also need to not just focus on lip service, but educate both active citizenry and public servants, representatives of various interest groups, how to have a dialogue together. Sometimes it's a school when you help, for instance, youngsters understand how their school budget is being assembled. It's useful not just to them, but also their parents. It's also very interesting to the teachers of that school. The administration really likes that because it allows them to understand what is needed in a strategic way so that they can plan expenditure better. And of course, that's something which shows that you can partake in decision-making from early years on, and the next challenge is to move on to the municipal decision-making in your neighborhood, and so on. And this is what's happening slowly. And I'm very happy to see that it's not just about anti-corruption or corruption anymore. It's also about integrity, it's about active citizenry, and it's about this quality of decision-making and the transparency of decision-making, which is at the core of any conversation on trust in your government and in your country.
Finland, Sweden, Denmark and Luxembourg have the smallest amount of citizens, less than 50%, that say that corruption is widespread in their country. The fifth and sixth are Estonia and Germany, both 51%. So mostly it's northern and some western part of Europe. Somehow nothing promising for Eastern Europe. So how would you comment on this?
It's also a very good question because, of course, it is important to acknowledge that new EU member states, the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, have made significant progress over the past 20 years. Because it's very easy to forget where we started from. In the early 1990s, the conversations and the challenges we had were not about just political corruption. People had to give bribes right and left, dealing with municipal servants. They thought that they have to give bribes. They were distrustful of their governments and service providers. That has changed dramatically. And we see from the data we have on our hands is that whether it's Lithuania, whether it's Poland, whether it's Slovakia, or any other country within the EU, the issue of bribery is a much smaller issue than it was before. However, it is true that with new EU member states, the legacy of informal connections and you thinking that you need to give a gift to a doctor or some municipal servant is a little bit more prevalent. And that is changing, but I think what is key here is that it's important to realize we need a little bit more time, but not to be complacent and wait for that change passively, but to actually invest in education. What I mean by education is not a training or a workshop. What I mean is this engagement format when you as a compliance officer or the head of a particular institution come in and you develop the values of, for instance, a hospital together with your colleagues. You speak to them about what a good quality service provision is all about. And you decide which steps you take to actually make sure that patients would feel safer when they enter that outpatient clinic, how they can offer their feedback, how you use that feedback to make your services better. You make sure that your colleagues feel comfortable and respected. And this is a more complex conversation which needs to be had if we want to make sure that people don't think that the environment is overly corrupt, because a lot of times they don't have that experience. They base that judgment on the hearsay, on the perception of corruption, or thinking that they do not understand why certain things happen the way they do. If you sort that out, I think the numbers would be very different, and that would be the right way to go.
That's interesting, because I was always interested in where does this thought that you have to leave a little gift to a doctor, what is it about? Where does it come from?
Well, it's a principal-agent dilemma. Very few people believe that this is something that they really have to do. They do it because they think that it would speed up services or would ensure better quality of service.
Well, let's be honest. At some point, it really does speed up the process. Or maybe I am still thinking that it speeds up the process.
Exactly. So then the question is, who should drive the conversation forward? And I think the message here is very simple. It's the heads of those institutions that need to set the tone and make sure that when people come in and learn the rules of the game, because when you come into an establishment, you don't know how to behave. You're looking for cues. You're looking for certain guidelines. And of course, you ask people before that, well, what do I do? How do I actually go about a certain process? So what you do, you start that conversation preemptively.
Good people tell you good things, bad people tell you bad
Exactly.
things.
So you start the conversation preemptively. You message what you want to say front and center. You make sure that it transmits in people's behavior. So it's straightforward. It has very few double connotations when you don't know what it actually means. People are polite and nice to you. Because a lot of times when we take, for instance, this day-to-day service provision, people just want to know that everything is going to be all right. And those people who are in the position of power, those on whom it depends that everything would be all right, can transmit that through their body language, through the vocabulary they use. But again, this is not the reason why corruption that's not the only reason why corruption is on the EU agenda. We all understand that political corruption is also a big issue. Our political parties do need to focus more on themselves, meaning that a lot of scandals that we have, I think, regardless whether it's the east or the west of the EU, the north or the south of the EU, is because our political parties do not consult enough within their own ranks as to how to behave in a way that you actually do not end up in a conflict of interest situation, that you actually avoid certain moments which seem to be very not transparent. And I think this is something which is also an important conversation not to forget.
Still, as I already said in the very beginning, that 68% of EU citizens consider corruption to be widespread in their member states. So that's quite a huge number, I'd say. But let's end this interview on the positive note. So where have we improved in fighting corruption?
Well, I think if you look at the eastern part of the EU, we have really managed to curb the issue of petty corruption. We look at the data we have and we see that, for instance, in a place like Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, Estonia, if you're stopped by a police officer, you don't think about giving a bribe. That was not the case just 15 years ago. And so that change is possible. If you take the medical profession, the difference is night and day. And yes, sometimes there are still issues. But what is important to address, I think, is the theory of change and the way we go about this positive improvement. And it's clear that law enforcement now is not the only answer. Yes, it's important that they're well-resourced, and it's important that there's this culture of consequences for your actions present in every single EU member state. But I think it's important to collaborate and cooperate. So you have to talk to each other. You have to compare notes. You have to understand that certain things you, as for instance, law enforcement, cannot do alone. So prevention kicks in. People from monitoring agencies need to participate in the conversation. You need to engage academics, public policy, not-for-profit organizations, active citizens, because only through that dialogue and setting very clear indicators, which are not perfectionist and, you know, those pies in the sky that you cannot really reach, but very hands-on. You understanding what it is that you do in year 1, you do in year 2, you do in year 3, so that you inspire people and you empower people is the way to go. And I think this is the change that is slowly taking place. That is why I'm so happy to see social norms, behavioral insights being much more present in the conversation on anti-corruption. You have participatory budgeting, you have citizen assemblies, and this is something which gives me a lot of hope. And if you look on overall trends, you see that people really like that. They want to participate. They want to have a say. And I hope more and more governments on the national and the local level will take that on board.
So looks like everything starts with healthy society and ends up with healthy society.
Yes.
Okay. Sergejus, thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope to see you once again.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I would like to remind our viewers that our guest for today was a founder of the transparencyschool.org and a board member of the European Compliance Professionals Association, Sergejus Muravjovas. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us.